Hello everyone. It's been a while since I've made an Elden Ring Dissected. I'm sure I'll get back to it eventually, but I've got a bit of a different kind of video for you today. We're going to examine and debunk some claims about AI being used in the creation of Elden Ring concept art. We'll go over a couple examples, but to be perfectly honest, I'm not interested in thoroughly debunking all of them. Someone messaged me on Reddit to try and share their sort of conspiracy theory about how the Elden Ring art book is a scam. They assert that a lot of the concept art was made after the game came out, because they believe it wasn't really concept art and that we're essentially being defrauded. That they lazily threw a bunch of stuff together after the fact to justify selling the latest art book. But before we even get started, I should make a couple things clear. Even if it came out that AI was used somewhere in the pipeline or for certain images, that's sort of besides the point, as the allegations I want to address really aren't about AI at the end of the day. It's about how an anti-AI bandwagon is used as a jumping off point for some people to be really hostile and condescending to artists who aren't even using AI in the first place. If you're wondering where I stand on all of this, I don't think Midjourney should be legal. I think that any generative AI that is trained on artwork without the permission of the original artists should be regulated out of existence. I'd hope I shouldn't have to clarify that, but since I'm going to be criticizing a mindset that seems to be like a really ill-conceived offshoot of hating AI, I nonetheless feel compelled to explain that none of this is coming from a place of wanting to defend it. So, about this whole Elden Ring thing. The person who shared it with me hoping I'd listen to them tried posting it to at least a couple different subreddits, and pretty much everyone was shooting down their claims. If this is just one person whose opinion isn't gaining any traction, what's the point in even responding? Well, I'm not responding because I think the art book needs anyone defending it, or that this one person needs to be proven wrong. I'm doing this because I'd like to use my platform to call something out that I see as being part of a bigger issue in the current discourse about creating art. I was already ready to rant about this because of some of the discussion surrounding the Ghibli AI garbage. We'll get to that later, but the person trying to accuse FromSoft of creating fake concept art was making a lot of the same mistakes I've seen people make elsewhere. And being a Souls content creator, someone dropping into my DMs unprovoked to say nasty things about the Elden Ring concept art gave me the assurance that a lot of the thoughts I've already had on my mind lately will have a good home on my channel. So, here we go. Here's what that anonymous Redditor had to say. They claim that a lot of the concept art in the Elden Ring art book appears to be fake concept art created by various methods, using screenshots of 3D models and environments, and then clumsily editing those screenshots, having tiled textures edited into perspective using warping tools to save effort in painting them, and possibly using AI to generate parts of images. So here's the glaring problem to start with. These discussions were all framed around whether or not they used AI. It's the main focus of their Imager album title, and it was the main focus of the Reddit thread title, but AI only got an "and possibly" at the end of their list. This is because what they're mad at actually has nothing to do with AI. But I am interrupting, let me allow them to continue. They also say that the concept art is a lie, and that it literally isn't concept art. I presume the reason for this is that they didn't plan things properly and were probably constantly adjusting environments during development, so they weren't actually using concept art as reference. Then, when they were done making the environments, they decided to use the already made areas as reference to make fake concept art for the art book. They also go on to say, the editing of this fake concept art is so slapdash and unprofessional that is frankly embarrassing. It's shocking it hasn't been called out before when it's this bad. They're selling it for money, and the people buying it are essentially being defrauded. The following images will be some of the more egregious examples of shitty editing, fakery, and possible AI-generated images. Now, I'm not going to go through all of them, because like I said, I just don't see the point in doing that, but this all basically boils down to someone not understanding what concept art is, and then being hugely disrespectful to the artists involved. Let's take a look at the concept art for the 4 belfries. This is what they had to say about it. Behold, the finest foliage ever created in MS Paint. They charged money for this, lol. No idea what's happening with the transparency on the bottom of the belfries. They copy-pasted a single belfry several times, using some kind of skew tool to try and fake perspective. It doesn't hold up. They didn't even cut out the space behind the bells. Okay, so this is what we call anomaly hunting. I'll have more to say about what exactly that is and how it works in the broader context of conspiracy theories in general in a moment, but it's pretty self-evident here. This person already has a narrative that the people who made this are lazy grifters. They're starting with the conclusion that something is wrong here, and anything that they think looks suspicious is going to serve as validation to them. And they're never going to stop to think critically about why there's actually a perfectly logical explanation for everything they see. The elephant in the room here is that this is concept art. Yes, sometimes concept art goes hard and is absolutely gorgeous. Maybe the artist was allotted more time and effort because there's an understanding that some of the concept art will be tapped for promotional materials later on. Or perhaps an artist was entrusted to make something extremely detailed so that the people making the 3D models and textures later on don't have to do too much interpreting of their own. But it should go without saying, this is not how all concept art works, not even remotely. What concept art needs to be is entirely dependent on the context. Sometimes you just need a simple concept conveyed, and what that was here was clearly a rough pitch for how the 4 belfries were going to be laid out on top of a hill, and what the general shape of the path leading to it might look like. Why do we wind up with these copy and pasted belfries? Because one was clearly drawn on its own beforehand, and then that asset was tapped for reuse in this more distant view. Why is there this rough transparency here? Maybe because the goal was trying to convey a concept, and the artist wasn't overly concerned with covering their tracks on how the image was put together. What this person doesn't seem to understand is that the artist who made this would actually be a bad employee if they didn't do what was asked of them and spent more time on this than they needed to. Concept art comes in all shapes and sizes, and this is what a rough sketch simply looks like in concept art. Sometimes you're mashing existing assets into something else, so things are going to be cobbled together. It wasn't remotely lazy of the artist to do it this way, because they weren't trying to make a higher quality piece of artwork that stands on its own to begin with. They were doing their job, and they were doing it correctly. This should all be extremely obvious, but the nature of these complaints get at the heart of the underlying issue. Claims of AI use were not even made for this particular image. They made fun of the artwork comparing it to MS Paint, and thought it was funny that people were charged to see stuff like this in an art book. When I pressed them on this, they said, "I don't think that the belfry image serves the purpose of concept art because it's basic to the point of being useless. What would be the point of using those childish scribbles as references for the 3D level artists?" So, any 3D level artists want to chime in? Is all of the concept art you get extremely detailed so you always have a solid blueprint with clear dimensions to follow? Or is it perfectly normal to get rough concepts sometimes to help turn something like this into this? Feel free to sound off in the comments below, but we all know the answer to that already. Of course this is perfectly functional and respectable concept art, yet this person describes it as childish and derides it as an MS Paint creation. The mask is off here. If anyone wants to pretend that they're against AI because it steals artwork and it's lazy and it's disrespectful to artists, but they disparage the work of actual artists and question all of the non-AI techniques they use, they are absolutely 100% not an ally to artists, and they certainly don't care about the work they do. Of course, everything they say is colored by refusing to understand what concept art is on a fundamental level, but allow me to back up for a second to talk about anomaly hunting. Anomaly hunting is what lies at the heart of every conspiracy theory that relies on scrutinizing something, often pictures or video, to manufacture evidence for your dubious claims. People will look at video of the Twin Towers collapsing and see debris shooting out of the building as each floor collapses. They'll think this is proof that it was a controlled demolition, refusing to entertain the reasoning of smarter individuals who point out that that's just the result of the floors falling on top of each other, or how that's not what a controlled demolition even looks like, or any other myriad of things. These are people who want to believe something is wrong. They already have a set narrative. They are not looking at the evidence in earnest, and they are, instead, ultimately deceiving themselves through confirmation bias. Here we have an anomaly in the form of a rough transparency, but any reasonable person knows why it's there. Yet to this person, it's evidence that the area was designed in-game first, and that this image was made after the game came out in order to help sell the art book. An incredibly wild conclusion. Oh, and also the quality of the artwork was childish too, apparently. Cool stuff. I don't think I need to belabor the point too much here, but I do want to quickly get through just a couple more examples of theirs before moving on to the bigger picture. They really didn't like this one either. They complain that the statues are 2D images that are haphazardly rotated and posted around. They think it's possible evidence of AI art, which it's really not. AI doesn't manually copy and paste a bunch of whole assets like this around, but I don't think I need to get into that. They admitted that it could have been done by a human, but that would mean that they're incompetent. Once again saying disparaging things about human artists doing their job competently and correctly. Is this even an area in the game is an incredibly funny thing to remark, too. I thought the narrative is that they were lazily throwing things together based on places that already exist in-game. Wouldn't that be a lot more effort to make this, then? Not that it would be suspicious to have concept art for an unused area, and never mind the fact that most Elden Ring players probably immediately recognized where this was, because it is in-game. But Anomaly Hunting has led this person down a road of being distrustful of everything they see in incredibly naive and inconsistent ways. Here's one where they probably think they have some ironclad proof that there's fake concept art made after the game came out. Because look at what we have here. We clearly have a modified in-game screenshot, so this is proof that they had to have made the game first, and so they're clearly lying to us. Except, not. All that's proof of is that this is a later concept that was made much further into development. Why would they make concept art this way? I don't know, man. I'm not a game dev, but thinking about it for even just a brief moment raises a few possibilities. The one that makes the most sense to me is late-stage refinement. The overworld of Elden Ring was made with the assistance of procedural generation. Not every rock, or tree, or bush, or incline of a hill was placed or handcrafted by the developers. But to prevent the overworld from just being a bunch of random, meaningless nonsense, this means that artists would be tasked with reviewing various environments and coming up with suggestions for more bespoke set pieces. That, or the people making the art book slipped up and thought we would be too stupid to recognize that a screenshot is an early stage concept art, and you found secret evidence of some conspiracy that only you are smart enough to recognize. I know which answer I'm going with. Now, here's the thing. Do I have an explanation for everything this person calls out in every image? No. I'm not an artist. There's a few images that sometimes have some really weirdly messy stuff in there, and without a broader context, I might think it's AI as well. Given the timeline of Elden Ring's development, do I think it's much more likely that this is a bunch of photo-bashed assets that are sloppily blended due to the sketchy nature of concept art? Yes. But would it change anything I've said in this video so far if AI was used in a few of these images? Absolutely not. You would be able to criticize that if you wanted to, but the central problem here was never AI. It was always just looking for any reason to throw the artists under the bus, including cases where AI obviously wasn't used as well. If there is any AI in here, this person didn't do themselves any favors by throwing out a huge list of unrelated grievances we have to ignore, and by being incredibly dismissive and condescending to the artists. A bit of AI showing up wouldn't validate this person, because they still called this childish and didn't understand its purpose. They still called whoever made this incompetent and didn't understand its purpose. They still called this shoddy and didn't understand its purpose. This is someone who doesn't respect artists or the creative process. These specific kinds of complaints are indefensible, and that's what I'm talking about. I let this person know that if they want to be taken seriously, that they need to learn to make serious complaints, and not, complain that the scabbard here looks like, according to them, a big dildo. This is all obvious nonsense, so let's move on. How about that Ghibli AI crap? If you've been fortunate enough to not be terminally online, or at least you've managed to stay away from Twitter, Instagram, and certain parts of Reddit, you might be hearing about this for the first time now. If that's the case, generative AI tools have made another incremental, but not insignificant step in being able to imitate the styles of certain studios and artists. At the center of this discussion is how it's been used to copy the style of Studio Ghibli. It's been everywhere. It sucks. And there was also a particularly incendiary use by the White House Twitter account using it to mock a drug dealer being arrested and deported. Yes, really addressing systemic issues regarding drug addiction by stopping one person. Time to do a victory lap. Anyways, I shouldn't have to clarify my thoughts on this. Of course I'm not cool with using AI tools in this way. But I dropped into a conversation with something that I really didn't think was a hot take, but it got some surprising and, in my opinion, very misguided backlash. To give context for this, there's a video from 8 years ago called Hayao Miyazaki's Thoughts on an Artificial Intelligence. This one particular upload got over 1 million views, but really it got a lot more than that being clipped to Twitter and around the internet back in the day. In it, he was presented a demo that involved AI, but his response to the people presenting it is that he was utterly disgusted and thought it was an insult to life itself. Pretty sick burn on AI, right? So of course a lot of people were talking about this when referencing the recent Ghibli AI nonsense, and I don't think they were inherently wrong to do so. Given how strongly he felt about this, it's not like the quote is irrelevant. However, in its original context, it's much less flattering to Miyazaki because this wasn't about the same kind of AI being talked about today. He was basically just being needlessly cruel to people presenting a physics sim for models with ragdoll physics, where if a creature had an odd shape, or perhaps something was possessing and controlling its movements in such a way where it didn't understand how to use its anatomy correctly, machine learning could be used to create different ways for these models to navigate their environment. It was really just a tool for simulating movement in a 3D environment. Now, watch how he brings this guy to tears over it.
毎朝この頃会わないけど身体障害の友人がいるんですよ。そのハイタッチするんだけど大変なんです。彼の筋肉がこわばってる手と僕の手でこうハイタッチする。でその彼のことを思い出してね、僕はこれ面白いと思って見ることできないですよ。これを作る人たちは痛みとかそういうものについてね、何も考えないでやってるでしょ。極めて不愉快ですよね。そんなに気持ち悪いものをやりたいなら勝手にやってればいいだけで、 僕はこれを自分たちの仕事とつなげたいとは全然思いません。極めて何か生命に対する侮辱を感じます。
これでもほとんど実験なので、
それは分かってます。
その世の中に見せてどうこうってそういうものじゃないんです。
それは本当によく分かってるつもりですけど。
No, I'm not overly concerned with litigating Miyazaki's response. I have my take on it. I think it was extremely callous, and also very short-sighted because virtually every other animator on the planet would immediately understand its potential use cases. But unfortunately, they have to deal with an extremely talented artist who probably just has a massive ego and a short temper. And also, acting like others don't understand pain, and being offended on behalf of a disabled friend, like as if you're the only person who cares about others, is hollow nonsense. To be generous to the people wanting to side with Miyazaki, though, I'm happy to concede that there could be some context that was lost in the edit. When they were asked what their goal was, someone else mentioned wanting to be able to build a machine that can draw pictures like humans do. Was this team at the forefront of generative AI? Was the brief of the meeting that these people plan to replace all the work that humans do with computers and AI and all of that fancy stuff? If so, maybe they deserve to be mocked and kicked out of there. But that doesn't do a lot to change the context of his immediate response. He wasn't referring to generative AI as an insult to life itself. He was referring to using software to make a zombie crawl around as an insult to life. Which is still pretty absurd, no matter how you slice it. If you're thinking, oh, but this is his craft, of course he's allowed to have strong opinions on it, it's not like Studio Ghibli hasn't made weird corrupted creatures before. And it's not like they haven't used computers in doing so. CGI was used here.
The tendrils that wrap themselves around Ashitaka's arm as he fires off an arrow were also made using CGI. Utilizing the software developed with the help of Microsoft, Ghibli was able to input specific data relating to perspective, shading, and movement.
None of this is inherently disrespectful to life. What matters is the narrative. And that narrative obviously isn't going to be present in a short tech demo. I can't see this as anything other than old man yells at clouds nonsense, and I have a hard time seeing eye to eye with people who side with Miyazaki on this. But all of that being said, none of that really matters, because I take issue with some of the responses I got when bringing this up. There was a crew of people who all seemed to be on the same page, thinking that an animator referencing something like this would be bad, or would make them less professional, or that even using computers in apparently any capacity for reference is undesirable. Someone asked, why were they showing this to a great artist and not to scientists? I wonder what biologists and physiognomists would have to say about it. Would they be any more impressed or grateful for having this tool? I replied with, because this wouldn't help with the advancement of science, but it could help animators at Studio Ghibli with creating reference materials. And then they responded with, for what? Why wouldn't life itself be enough? In the context of this conversation, I can assure you that this wasn't being asked with an open mind. It was born out of distrust of the usefulness of a tool like this, explaining the air quotes. They had the opinion that an animator should be photographing their own reference materials instead of using a computer. Someone else dropped in with their interesting take. They said, turns out you don't need AI to figure that out. You just need Gary's Mod and an 11-year-old who's bored. Now, go pick up a pencil and create something actually worthwhile. I should have exited the conversation at this point, since this one person turned out to be a weird troll, but nonetheless I replied in earnest. I asked, how would this obviate picking up a pencil? I'm not defending generative AI. Using a physics sim for reference is fine. It's fine if an 11-year-old does it with Gary's Mod, it's fine if an adult does it with their own in-house software. I feel like I need to explain the concept of reference material. They responded with, if only there was a way to make reference material before the invention of the computer, or a way to capture physical images to use at a later time to reference. And they snarkily included a couple images of things that obviously exist. So now we've reached a point where people are saying that someone using computers makes them a bad artist. Or at least according to these people, it's not something a professional artist would do. I feel like it'd be really easy to take this clip about the making of Klaus out of context to get these people to be very judgmental about it, because the real art understanders have logged on, and they would be perfectly happy to besmirch the work of talented animators because computers, and even quote-unquote AI, was used to help with the lighting. How unprofessional of them.
With 3D CGI, light is added automatically to objects, but it's trickier with 2D.
But with lines, with drawings, the computer needs a certain level of AI to even understand that this line corresponds to this line, and this hand is also this hand.
I'm sorry, but if it makes sense to you to be a weird gatekeeper about using these kinds of techniques, that's pretty dumb and you've completely lost the plot here. There's a form of anti-AI brain rot that has completely looped back around to just hating any technique or toolset an artist might use, stuff that isn't generative AI. Just as someone thinks the techniques used to make this concept art were worthy of derision, an animator should be limiting their reference tools to this because reasons? Anyways, if we want to ignore that person for doubling down on being a troll, seriously, they got really weird with it, I got other responses that appeared to be in good faith, but were displaying similarly painful levels of not getting it. I can guarantee you that professional artists at that level are making their own references, instead of lazily relying on a program to do it for them. Chat, is making your own 3D character models, rigging them, and modeling a 3D environment for them to move around in, and then tweaking the parameters until you get what you want, and then using that output as reference for what's likely to only be a few specific scenes, while also probably referencing all kinds of other traditional reference materials for your otherwise 2D hand-drawn animation, lazy? Is this something professional artists would avoid? When I pressed them on this, they said, nowhere did I mention creating software. I'm talking about relying on software that already exists, when an artist can just take a camera and use it themselves to make their own reference. I just don't get this. Who makes the software is a really silly point of contention. Maybe I misunderstood the original pitch. It was a different company presenting it when I referred to it as prospective in-house software, but regardless if it was going to be developed into a tool to be licensed to Ghibli, or further developed and owned by Ghibli themselves, why would that even matter? They collaborated with Microsoft in the past to help develop software to integrate CGI into Princess Mononoke, for example. Are you going to tell Miyazaki to pick up a pencil? What even is the point in all of this? I don't get this weird purity test that people who ostensibly care about how art is made have come up with. Anyways, it was also very clear that a lot of these people weren't watching the video and refused to entertain the original context. Someone interjected with this "whatever you're talking about" bit, but it was extremely obvious what I was talking about. I was talking about the thing that Miyazaki was talking about, in response to the video being linked above. The thing this whole conversation was about. So it was clear that people had already made up their minds beforehand without even knowing the context. Similar to the Elden Ring conspiracy theorist, they were starting from a conclusion without wanting to think about it further. AI bad, therefore everything Miyazaki said must be valid. But the unfortunate downstream effect of this is weird mental gymnastics on why someone shouldn't be using a computer at all, or why an animator should apparently photograph their own reference materials. Asking loaded questions like, why isn't life enough? Because they've worked themselves into having some really absurd opinions about what artists should or shouldn't use. I don't know if it feels strange to some viewers that I made a video about this. I get that making a video about my brief interactions with just 5 specific people has strong "someone was wrong on the internet" vibes. And I totally get that there's just one person making these claims about the Elden Ring concept art, and virtually everyone already disagrees with them. But I do think this is part of a much bigger problem. Artists are constantly harassed over false allegations of using AI. This is happening in pretty much every large enough community that makes art, and I'm sure people in the comments here could probably let us know about all sorts of nasty stuff that has happened in their communities as a result. And while false, direct allegations of AI use are somewhat tangential here, it's all part of the same wider issue. People think they are righteous for hating generative AI, something I understand and sympathize with, but it's caused a subset of people to be incredibly stupid about it. In their confused frustrations, they're also now very dismissive and gatekeepery about work that actual artists do, ones who aren't using generative AI. And some of the people from that Ghibli conversation might not be too pleased to see their responses highlighted alongside the Elden Ring conspiracy theorist, assuming they ever see this video. They weren't alleging anything as absurd. I think even they would understand that what that person was saying was wrong. But I don't think I'm off base in bringing them up together, because there's a similarity in not thinking critically about the creative process and having extremely close-minded opinions about the tools and techniques available to artists. The Elden Ring person refused to understand reasonable techniques for making concept art, and the Ghibli responders refuse to understand what reasonable reference materials are. While I'm talking about all of this, I think this video deserves a brief addendum to address what might be an elephant in the room for some viewers. Some of you might be thinking, wait a second, Illusory, didn't you make a couple AI Dark Souls videos? I did, and I'm not exactly ashamed of them. I'm happy to link them in the video description here. Feel free to judge these videos if you like, I'm not shut off to criticism. Maybe there was something unethical in their creation I overlooked, but they are almost 4 years old now, and more on that in a second. For now I don't have any plans to delete them, but I did unlist them months ago. The only way to find them now is my playlist for Dark Souls Dissected, but they won't show up in a YouTube search or in recommended videos or anything like that. I was just concerned about how my channel might look to someone who's new to my videos, and not really understanding when and how those videos were made. I wasn't pressured by anyone into unlisting them, I just saw one of them pop up in my own continue watching or recommended videos or something like that, and I just had a sort of visceral reaction to it. I was like, oh yeah, this doesn't look great, does it? But I don't think having made them is hypocritical to my stance on AI today, or that we can even really say that my opinion on generative AI has changed significantly over time. It just really wasn't much of a thing yet. In fact, I even raised the question if the software I was using might have a racial bias. It's not like I mindlessly glazed the stuff. But there was a novelty to seeing if this weird new software could try and create more realistic faces of Dark Souls NPCs at the time, and the humor involved when it made funny looking things. In its original context, it didn't feel like I was encroaching on anyone's art because it wasn't trained on stolen artwork. This was an extremely primitive tool that could only generate human faces from one specific angle, trained solely on a database of photographs of human faces. Might some people be repulsed by this technology as a stepping stone to the generative AI we see today? Yeah, maybe. And if that's how you feel about it, I'm not going to try to convince you to feel otherwise. Someone might watch these videos and then want to play around with Midjourney. So I suppose that just gave me a bit of an icky feeling. And then in addition to that, I was also worried people might think I make AI content or use it a bunch in my videos, which is not the case. If you've watched other videos of mine, I hope it's obvious that those videos were one-offs. I have no interest in making AI content, and it hasn't made its way into the production of my videos. I don't even particularly feel the need to go on the defensive here, but I know some people were probably wondering about those videos, and I hadn't yet explained anywhere why they were unlisted. And doing so just wasn't a big deal to me. I had fun making them. The actual process involved doesn't have the same stink as modern generative AI, but I can also appreciate someone seeing this in their recommendations and noping out. So I just unlisted them without much internal debate. It was an easy decision. The most wild thing to come out of all of that was Osmongold reacting to it, which now that I think about it, that means it's technically publicly available on his channel, but not my own. That's pretty funny in a kinda sad way. I'm too apathetic to do anything about it, but for now I'll just say child labor bad, actually. Anyways, what was the point of this video again? Something about respecting artists, I guess? If you don't like generative AI because of how it often uses stolen artwork, we're on the same page. But if you've somehow wound up in a place where you think this is childish artwork, if you think this is incompetent, or if you think using a physics sim for reference is unprofessional, maybe consider rethinking everything. That's it. That's the video. Have a good day.